So 2013, I think it's good for us to look back and understand a little bit more about the predictions we had, and obviously looking forward for 2014. I think we're all experts in our own fields. So I think we should all be putting our necks out there and determining what we think the future is going to hold. So what do we see?
Or what did we talk about last year, I guess, and did any of our predictions last year come true?
Well, I made 2.
Okay.
I got 50% hit rate. So
Good.
not bad. So last year, I think I talked about, one was that negative SEO would become really commonplace because Google obviously for the first time, started looking at links and actually penalising sites for it rather than just ignoring links. So this is the first time there was kind of an explicit negative signal in the algorithm, which meant that in theory you could then just go and buy a ton of really awful links to your competitors and get them penalised. And I think that's the one that, if it's not become commonplace, but I guess it's come true to a certain extent. We've seen for our clients a lot of times where we're working along on the stuff and all of a sudden you see a massive injection of links coming in from God knows where, and it's clearly someone else who's kind of come along and gone, yeah, I'm going to ruin your day by just trying to spike it with links. I don't think it's very easy though. I think Google's pretty good still at mostly just ignoring stuff, but it is clearly possible to spike a site and ruin their day. So that's the one that came true to a certain extent. The other one I predicted was that there would be a tool in AdWords that would let you see the secondary searches off of a knowledge graph search. So a generic search that triggered a knowledge graph result. And then I said that people would potentially start bidding on the secondary searches because the knowledge graph encourages you to do more longer tail searches. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that tool exists in AdWords. There's no way of really seeing what funnel people are taking through the knowledge graph searches.
Certainly not through the knowledge graph, but
No.
I think one of the tools that we use a lot more, or certainly has been used a lot more this year, is the search query report. And obviously that allows you to see what queries your keyword is actually visible for.
Yeah.
So whilst it's not a reflection of the knowledge graph, it's interesting because it allows us to expand our campaigns, and I guess to your prediction, it's really helped us to focus more on the long tail.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how certain verticals have changed. So if I pick on fashion, for example, people are less product specific focused. They're thinking of product including colour, price, size, style, trend, that kind of thing, and that's really evolved the type of campaigns that those type of businesses will now.
Do you think that's
have.
like a natural effect of just over time things are getting more long tail, or do you think the
Absolutely.
knowledge graph has materially impacted on it at all? Because like last year it was a big thing, which is why I predicted something about it, but perhaps it's not been as big as I thought it would be.
I don't know if there's a direct correlation. I think it might just be a bit of a coincidence right now.
Yeah.
So there's definitely more of, it's a reflection of how searches is become more of a sophisticated thing. People aren't just typing in dress or mortgages,
Yeah.
and people are certainly a lot more savvy when it comes to using Google or Bing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how that's now changed the way that we do search or how we manage search.
Yeah.
That's good, 50% rate.
Yeah, not that hard when you predict two things.
But who else predicted? Who else was in the prediction?
Me last year, I took to it. It was kind of a prediction, but a continuation of I guess the pattern I'd seen emerging for quite some years now. So last year I talked about how search and display was going to be more integrated, more of I guess an effect of Google putting technology first in terms of getting into the real-time bidding world, but also finally launching its own bid management tool. And I guess my prediction was roughly about 70% true, in the sense that they've definitely gone ahead and done that. Whether they've become the dominant force that I was expecting them to be, I guess they haven't, and a lot of that's to do with how their focus has changed over the years. So they were very much about the tech stack through at the big earlier part of the year, and that's obviously something that Pete is aware of, obviously with us having our own platform, Hydra. But it's interesting how their focus is now a lot more around audience targeting, and I won't go into too much detail because that's my prediction moving forward. But the setup of the technology is, I guess, paved the way for how audience targeting needs to play out. So yeah, it's definitely been an interesting year, but I mean, Google still remains the dominant force in search without a doubt, but not in display yet. But I guess only time will tell.
Is that really going to change then, in terms of obviously its dominance going forward?
I don't think so. I guess it just depends. I mean, as a advertiser, globally there'll always be a dominant force. What channels they they have dominance over, I guess, will depend on how well thought out their roadmap is. So I know their big focus for 2014 is branding budget, so using platforms like YouTube to try and get hold of that. But then we've done a lot of international work with our clients this year, and we've done a lot of work in China, for example, and the words Google don't exist to a certain extent. And it's really interesting to see how local platforms are doing so much more and so many interesting things and playing to the local market.
I do wonder in terms of social and kind of how that looks in what's coming. And that obviously everyone was going to Google, but obviously Facebook and Twitter are trying to make a big play in those areas as well, and trying to take that traffic. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's any thoughts around, obviously Google being the dominant force, and I agree, I think they will be, but how much of the market share are they going to start giving up soon based on these new technologies?
Exactly. So the channels are now becoming, other channels are becoming as important, and therefore, you've got to be the master of one, not everything. So. Yeah, I guess. Well, how have you seen the social space change in the last year based on prediction?
Well, it was my erstwhile colleague Sam's prediction.
So you can distance yourself from it?
Yeah, well, Sam hasn't just suddenly changed into completely different looking person.
Yeah. So I'm seeing him thriving for a bit of Greenlight football, so I'll get the full lowdown from him how he thinks it's actually gone. But looking back over his prediction, it was about context being much more at play in terms of seeding and outreach and finding social influencers. And I don't think we've seen his prediction that we would develop methods to more accurately find influencers. I don't think we've got to that level of complexity yet, and his article's interesting because the problems that he mapped out in the article still exist. It's that he was a West Ham blogger. He probably doesn't mention West Ham very often on his Twitter at all, so a tool would struggle to find him as an influencer regarding West Ham. So it's about how we actually go about finding these influencers. I suppose the only real way is to do it manually at this point in time. There isn't a tool that can allow you just.
And that is a failing of the tool rather than the tools that exist. I think at Greenlight we have the best monitoring tools available, but even that one still can't do this sort of context. Driven search.
Yeah. It might be that you just have to extend the period of time you're looking over for influencers. You're stretching it back to a whole year to really start building up a bigger picture. But then you can miss influencers who come out of nowhere in more recent times as well. It's really tricky. So it's not what I'm going to focus on when talking about what's going to happen next year. And because I still think that we're quite far off Sam's prediction.
I'd be a bit controversial. I don't think that social signals really play any significant role at all in search engines.
Yeah.
I'm almost convinced, or I've heard some grumblings to the effect, that the experiments, at least one of the search engines did, actually proved that they could find no significant correlation between the two.
Yeah, this is the problem though. When you're talking about social signals as an SEO ranking factor, obviously social remains important as its own channel, but as a ranking factor, you've seen all these studies coming out this year, which have basically said Google Plus is the number one ranking factor based on correlation, but that's got nothing to do with actually what caused the ranks. It's clearly much more likely that someone ranks very highly and then they start getting Google Plus ones as opposed to getting up to plus ones causing the rankings. And I wrote about this in the latest SEO brief, where it kind of gets me quite mad because actually it gets a lot of publicity. Well, wow, Google Plus is like really important for SEO. Everyone picks it up, and it kind of gives this massively wrong impression. It gets companies focusing on the entirely wrong thing. At Greenlight, we like to focus on obviously what's going to drive results. And you look at a lot of data, Peter. I know perhaps this is feeding into what you're going to predict for next year, but it is important to focus on what really matters. And the Google Plus is, the fact that a couple of days after that study came out, Matt Cutts then said, actually, no, we don't use it at all in our algorithm, was quite funny. But that doesn't get as much coverage as the original piece did. Yeah, so exactly. I think people have the wrong perception.
Yeah, I'm convinced of that.
I've read several previews of people talking about 2014 already, and some people are saying Google Plus is the next big social platform because of its social signal potential, and I don't buy it at all. I also feel like the numbers of monthly users for Google Plus are really inflated. They're talking something like 350 million monthly users. We're not seeing any activity on it at all. It's a channel we use for several clients, but we don't concentrate a great deal of resources on them because there's no interaction. It might just be a UK-based thing. Perhaps it's not prospering in the UK like it is elsewhere. But we're struggling to see why it would be beneficial for users. We can certainly see why it's going to be beneficial to businesses. I think it's designed too well for businesses that it would actually drive consumers away and not actually.
But there's business tools, isn't there? So the way I look at it is just based on my own observations. There's a business social platform, which is called LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is your private one when you're old like I am, which is called Facebook. And my kids are all on Instagram. Mm-hmm. So the platforms are basically kind of done, and I see no space for Google. Plus, I actually think it's dead. And I think what will happen this year is people will realize that it's dead.
Yeah.
That's part one of your predictions.
That's
Yeah.
So Google Plus won't exist this time next year.
No.
It would have been shut down.
No. It will exist, but it will not be the use of it. People will realize that there actually is no use for it. It doesn't fit anywhere.
So 2014, what do we think is going to happen next year?
I think it's going to be the year where search is going to become much more automated than this at the moment. I think there will be the driver will basically be existing customers, existing clients wanting to do more with less and to do significantly more. And the only way that's going to be possible is by automating to a larger extent than it's already done. So I think that this will be the year where search would be much, much more automated than it's been before.
What do you mean by that, though? Because obviously, the bid management tool's been around for quite some time. Are you referring to bids, or are you referring to automation of campaign management? What does that mean?
It's campaign management and realizing that SEO and PPC is actually the same thing. But one you pay a little bit more for. But fundamentally, the processes you go through are not very different. Mm-hmm. And consequently, there will be much more of an emphasis on doing those two in a cohesive way and in a fully automated way, because there's a lot of money to be made if you can save 30 or 40% of the effort that is invested in it, and if you can use that to invest in your brand, you'll be in a much better place.
So I'm really excited about what we can do with cloud SEO next year, and I mean I know you're obviously a lot closer to it than I am. So where are we up to with that? Is that going to be the game changer? Do you think?
I think for SEO it will potentially be a game changer, because you're trying to design the site on the basis of demand signals that you actually are seeing. Yeah. So it really is the fully automated SEO execution.
Yeah.
And I think it will kind of push, and once you've done that, you actually have got the first steps towards automating the building of your PPC campaigns as well. So I think it's incredibly important because of that.
So essentially, the future is we don't have to sort of plan a site structure for SEO anymore. This is the goal, really, because that's an incredibly time-consuming process of doing all the keyword research, and you can never really get it right. And if you can actually get a site which is evolving over time with search demand automatically and automatically doing all the cross-linking between the pages that you need for optimal SEO, and actually creating those pages in the first place, I agree it's a compelling future.
Well, I think the idea is, with all of this, is that why try and build something static where in fact the world is always moving, your content's moving, your products are moving, everything's always moving. When you're trying to build something static that represents that, it's just not realistic, and probably because it's hard to do it dynamically. But I think we believe in terms of research at the moment and work Hydra is doing that. I think we're going to see something very soon that actually allows that to happen and takes a lot of the kind of manual work away from people, but actually makes more effective in terms of their site being able to be visited, and hopefully allows the enablement of growth, which I think certainly for the focus of all of what we're trying to do for next year is about ensuring our customers grow across the board in whatever they're doing.
And I think that's about brand. And the other thing that will happen is Google has recently, with removing the information about the natural search keywords, tried to really the only thing that affects is the fact that you actually can't see performance of non-branded terms versus branded terms. And for me, it's just a blatant attempt at trying to get people to spend more money on brand advertising. And what I think will happen this year as well is people will become more aware of the fact that they should invest in brand in a much more social sense and spend less money on it, on actually bidding on branded advertising. And I think that's another thing that will happen more the next year.
Well, I think I better go next then, really, because that was pretty much going to be my point, that at the tail end of this year, we in the social team have seen really some real success from social advertising, and I think at this point we're getting to a stage where social advertising is more accountable than it's ever been. You can really see your ROI on social advertising spend now. The Facebook model of advertising is now settling, and it's slowly refining in quite a gentle manner. Twitter has gone about the same way. So that's my prediction for next year, is that spend on social advertising will go up. We'll probably see it more here at Greenlight as well, because at this point we know that we can actually deliver ROIs that we can accurately report on. So
I definitely agree with your prediction, and I guess seeing our own spend increase in Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn specifically has helped to support that prediction for 2014. But I guess the interesting thing for me about the social advertising channels is the fact that it's all about audience targeting. And earlier this year, Google made its biggest change in 10 years to the AdWords program, whereby it put the audience first and it put mobile first. So enhanced campaigns effectively means that although keywords are still very much part of the pay-per-click model, it's about understanding the person in front of the keyword. And that lends itself obviously to Facebook or Twitter, where you have an understanding of the profile of the user. It's the same with display, where we're actually optimizing by customer segments, and we'll soon be doing the same thing in search. So for me, although it's not necessarily a surprise to everyone, audience targeting is definitely going to be a big thing in 2014. And I think, going back to a point that you made earlier, Kevin, although it won't change the dominance Google has in search, it opens up other channels to advertisers, so you're not just investing all your money into Google, you'll be also investing a huge amount into Facebook and Twitter. And if I think about some of our client strategies this year, especially around luxury and lead generation, the social advertising channels have performed far better than search, which is really quite surprising, but a nice welcome surprise, because we've got now variety in terms of our advertising strategies.
So, Kevin, do you think that, taking that point one step further, do you think that you might actually see Facebook, like TripAdvisor, have got a very close integration with Facebook on the site? Do you think you're going to see that on more sites in e-commerce?
I don't know. I think one of the things that I'm predicting, and I'm not necessarily sure when it comes to looking at other channels and how they're being brought in, social channels directly into commerce, I think that likes of social commerce is still in its infancy, and I'm not quite sure people would trust yet making a purchase via Twitter to buy something and have it sent to their house. But certainly from using those data feeds about how people behave on those sites, I think they're going to feed much more into personalization and segmentation from an e-commerce perspective. I very much predict that. I think for next year, I think taking all the data that we know, whether it's somebody looking at Facebook, for example, or looking at site behaviors, either as a personal shopper who's looking at certain items or who has a certain behavior, or segmenting them into groups, we'll see a lot more around the advanced personalization of people and being targeted, either email campaigns or e-commerce campaigns, about what they're shopping, how they're behaving, how they're interacting with these likes of Instagram or Facebook. And which will also inform how they shop and what products are actually sent to them or they are offered in their experience in the e-commerce site. I think then that's also going to proliferate more to the offline shopping behavior, and so how people are interacting now across all of the other channels. And it previously been called Omnichannel commerce. I think it's just going to be called now commerce. There is no e-commerce anymore. It's just commerce. And so we're seeing things like behaviors on the site and behaviors offline based on access in store on tills, all going to create this larger set of data that has been around for a while, and people have been speaking about big data and behavioral data. But I think now retailers are becoming more mature in their ability to be able to use that data more effectively, and also the technology is caught up, and the ability to do segmentation and personalization in a managed way on e-commerce sites is kind of hit the point where it becomes real for not just the enterprise customers, but the kind of mid-tier market customers as well, who are able to use these tools in an enterprise way. I suppose then to wrap up, I think that we probably will see a bit more of, I think, one-to-one. So while we have this approach where we have I come on to a site and want to shop for a pair of shoes, and based on my previous behavior, either on the site or in store or in other channels, I'll be offered some recommendations. I probably see now the likes of some of the Kindle technologies being put in place now, where if I want to actually have a personal shopper there and then, that on the screen they'll pop up and someone will say, "Oh, hi, what would you like to buy today? Do you think those shoes will go?" And I'll have my camera and I'll have an actual physical person there to help me and convince me that I actually want to buy these things and up my basket value, and actually personally recommend something that I'll end up purchasing online. and this technology is there now. We're seeing it available straight away with the likes of the Kindle, where you can actually ask for help. I think it's going to be translated to certainly the fashion retailers who actually want actual personal shoppers. I'd be surprised if I don't see any of the big fashion brands soon providing one-to-one advice online in real time.
I think ASOS tried something a little bit similar, not as advanced as that, but a little bit similar a little while ago. I don't know if it's something they still do now, but yeah, I definitely see that progressing. It's interesting that a lot of financial businesses have always had that kind of online support. So a client of ours used a product called Salmon that, someone pops up and, do you have any questions about mortgages or life insurance? And that's really helped to bridge the gap between on and offline, but also to close that, the conversion point. It's almost interesting that fashion hasn't caught on to it a lot quicker, but you could see the interaction with fashion being a lot more interesting.
Absolutely, I think it's scalability and technology, and I think they're all starting to come together now to allow that to happen, and hopefully that prediction will come through next year.
And although, I see your point about you're not sure how far social will make its way into there, but I think fashion specifically has a great way of integrating social. Maybe that's an avenue where we'd see that developing a lot more.
Yeah, I can definitely think that, from the point I made, that I think it would be certainly shopping will be influenced very much by it.
Yeah.
But whether the active capture of the commerce interaction will happen on those platforms, I don't think we're there quite yet. But certainly as a major influencer, absolutely, I think that's definitely.
But I think it's this multi-channel scenario, and to Peter's point, it's about using the social channels for branding. Branding isn't just about television ads anymore. It's not about billboards. It's about all these other things. And social proofing, using social channels, you're having your mates or friends of brands saying, yes, I recommend this product, is clearly one of the biggest recommendations this year.
And I think that makes, to take that one step further, I think where search traditionally is really the domain of the big retailers. Yeah, it really is. Perhaps you have to go really kind of to the long tail in order to see smaller retailers actually start playing a role. It's interesting with social media and like Facebook or whatever it is, you have a much more close relationship with smaller brands like I have with my local menswear store, which I would really not have under any other circumstances. That would have no presence on the search side, but on the social side it has, which I think is the brand building again.
Absolutely.
So Adam, 2014, what do you see in terms of predictions for next year?
Well, I've been desperately looking for a segue from any of your predictions into mine, and I can't. It's just, I'm going to have to go off on a tangent here. I've got two things really, and they're about what companies are going to focus on, and I think they're going to focus on the wrong thing too much when it comes to SEO. One of the big bandwagons at the moment is this idea of schemas. So marking up bits of information on your page in a certain way, and it's actually the way that Google is telling people to mark up their content. And there's a schema for pretty much everything imaginable nowadays. If you look at the schemas that are available, there's very, very few of them that actually drive results for a brand. There's a few that kind of improve click-through rates, provide a little bit more information in the search results that Google's actually showing to users, which can make your site look more compelling to click on. But compared to the vast number of schemas where there's one for pretty much everything, it's very, very small. And I see a lot of A-list SEOs talking about how important it's going to be to get your site completely schemaed up to the max next year. And I think all it's doing is, it's actually quite a clever scheme by Google essentially, for them to find all the information and categorize it themselves so they can use it in their knowledge graph, give the information to users for free so that you don't have to click on a site and then go through. So actually what brands are going to do is end up spending too much time on something and not only is going to not bring any benefit, but it's actually going to help Google and reduce their natural search traffic.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting one at the moment and a bit of a concern. And again, it comes back to looking at what is going to drive results and what's going to drive revenue and implementing that, and not just doing everything that seems to be best practice, because that's what everyone's talking about doing.
Why do you think some sort of A-list SEO guys are
Well, I think a lot of people swallow the Google line very easily, and Google have put a lot of effort into creating the standards. They're a driving force behind creating a schema.org and making up all the schemas that they want to find the information out. If you go to their product launches that are designed more towards SEO agencies, they push the schema thing a lot as well, and so it can be very easy if you don't kind of critically analyse what the actual results are to kind of go down that route basically. Conversely, I think the thing that is important, which isn't getting as much attention and should be, is the authorship program that Google's released. And actually, the reason why I think it's not getting much attention is it's been around for a while. It's been overshadowed by Hummingbird algorithms and so on recently. And I think people have missed an awful lot of patents that have been filed and granted to Google this year about what authorship actually is. And it's not just about you as the author, it's also about Google understanding what readers like, whether they're experts in a topic. And if they're an expert in the topic that you're writing about, are they interacting favourably with your content or not? And companies are at risk of ignoring this, mainly because it's far too hard to actually do. So schemas is the easy solution, and I'll go and do that, that's like a bit of coding. Authorship is the hard bit, because fine, setting up for you as an author technically is very easy, but then you've actually got to go and create something which people really like, and that's a lot harder, so it's going to be much easier for people to just go, I won't bother with authorship. But I think given the amount of patents and that Google's got in relation to it, I think there's a very strong hint that it's going to be a serious part of the algorithm in the future. And that's me.
Interesting.
I think we're all going to find out in the next 12 months whether we're all right or not.
Could I ask a funny question?
Go on.
Do you think that Google's advertising revenue will go up next year or down?
Up.
Why is that a funny question?
I'm just interested in seeing what the general consensus is.
Well, it does every year, doesn't it, though? But I think it goes up every year because more advertisers engage with the programme. And to the point that I made earlier, Google has done a very good job at gaining market share globally and almost having dominance in many territories. But I think, to be fair to Google, it's because they've made the programme very easy if you compare Google's programme to other programmes. Why wouldn't we do it? There's a clear ROI, and ignoring the cynic in all of us, the releases of beta programs and obviously integrating search with other channels, I think makes it a fairly compelling product. It's obviously unfortunate for other channels.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come across as being anti-Google with that whole schema thing. I think it's very smart of Google to do this, and it makes total sense for them and fair play to them. It's really the fault of the people that are jumping on that bandwagon at the end of the day. So yeah.
But it's interesting how for the most part, all of the predictions that we've considered for 2014 are somehow interlinked. And I guess the central theme is, whether you want to call it audience or customer segmentation or personalization, it's about putting the customer first. And that, for me, is an important thing, because what's the point in doing marketing if you're not thinking about the customer? So it's nice to see that some of that will be automated. Some of it's about listening to how the consumer's interacting with brand via social, and obviously how we take those bits of information and use it through advertising and obviously site as well. So
I think it's all about relevance.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's going to come down to now. I think there's proliferation of so much information around, and because of that, how do we actually make it relevant for the customer, and how does the customer think that they are the ones at the centre of it? And I think that to do that with all the data and all of the opportunities and channels we have is difficult, but there's enough tooling and data now to allow us to be able to do that effectively and help our customers for next year.
Yeah, excellent.
A few of them are proven. There's only a few that are proven to improve click-through rates in a little way. But actually, people are jumping on the bandwagon fully, saying,
That's going to hit the blooper reel.
I knew that was
That's a blooper, yeah.
oh dear.
I'll pause that.